Hey folks, so welcome back to this discussion about adding ads to JUCE via the Google framework AdMob and Firebase. So in the previous video we implemented a banner ad, and it doesn't really do anything. It's part of our main content component and it's not very reusable, which is something that I definitely want to fix. So before we get that taken care of for banner ads, we're going to implement an interstitial ad. Those are the ads when you're playing your game or whatever, and they show up and they occupy the full screen, and there's a little X that appears in the corner. We're going to implement one of those, and then we're going to implement it in such a way that it's a reusable class. All right, so without further ado, what we have to do is strip out a bunch of code here and add some new files. So let me get that set up, and then I will discuss what I did. All right, so the first thing that I'm going to do in ProJuicer is I'm going to add two new files. First, I'm going to add a header file and a CPP file. First one is going to be AdMob. Let me save and reopen this. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of all of this stuff here. This is for the old code. We're not going to deal with any of that. Now, the old, and then same for over here. We'll leave this area in the timer stuff. Now let's get rid of these callbacks right here. Same for you, since we're not going to be controlling this that way. We'll leave that as is. Now, what we want to do is create an interstitial ad that is basically self-contained. All we have to do is just add it as a member of our class, and then it's going to just automatically display when we tell it to display and hide when we tell it to display. And it's going to destruct when we it's going to destruct whenever it needs to be destructed without any effort on our part. So that's what we want to have happen. We'll start over here. Now the first thing we need to do is we need to include the proper header file. Now that's over here under frameworks, be under Firebase AdMob, headers, Firebase, AdMob, interstitial ad. That's that right there. Okay, now we want to treat this as a regular JUCE component, so it gets all the resized stuff and whatnot. Part of the reason that it needs to be a JUCE component is that the interstitial ads need to have a pointer to the actual UI view object on iOS. So it's going to be a component. We're going to do the same. We'll do a similar timer thing. I'll show you what's going to happen here. Now, obviously, it's going to need it's going to have some private variables. The first one it's going to have is its add unit ID. That'll be our string ref like we did last time. We're going to have a duration for how long we want it to, basically how long we want to have between when this thing appears on screen. Now, last thing that we need is the actual ad itself. All right. Now, because we're using a multi-timer, we're going to need a couple different multi-timer things that have a couple different multi-timer steps in the process of showing an interstitial ad. The main process for showing them is first you're going to init the ad, then you're going to load it. You're going to request an ad be given to you from Google's servers. And then when that's actually done being loaded, you'll actually show the ad on screen. So we need to have a timer that we'll use an enum for this, timer IDs. And what we'll do is we'll have just the first timer ID that is for initializing the ad, and then we'll have one for actually spawning the ad. All right, now basically what's duration, this could be named better, but basically after it's initialized, because remember again, the ad has to be initialized with an actual on-screen Apple UI kit or UI view object. So the first one is, when we initialize it, it's got to actually be on screen. So this duration is actually going to be for once initialization finishes. It's going to be when this spawn ad timer is actually fired. All right, so let's create our constructor and destructor. Now this is going to take our ad ID, and then it's also going to be our duration between when this thing actually appears. Okay, and then our destructor. Right, now we need our timer callback. So void like that. Now because it's a component, we don't care about. The whole purpose of this is just to give it that window handle. So we don't need to use resize. We're not painting anything. It's never actually going to be drawn on screen. It's just so that we have access to a UI kit window handle, or a UI view. So let's talk about the next thing that needs to happen. Something that I did not like about the previous approach was how we had those static callbacks. I thought that was really ugly, and I didn't think that that was like a clean, usable way of specifying the code that's going to happen for every ad that appears. Like it was specific to that singular instance, and I thought that was kind of cumbersome and ugly. So we're going to figure out a way to do it with lambdas and std function. So we'll have just a regular structure. Oh, did I spell that wrong? Inters. This is going to be our structure. It's going to have a couple lambdas in it, like this. We're going to have a couple std function. I remember these work pretty well if you have the parameter that gets passed being that future thing that's returned from whenever your ad does something, it returns a Firebase future. So we'll do the same thing here, right? This is gonna be our call. We're gonna have a couple of these, so we'll do this is what we want to use when our initialization is done. And then we need one for loading, and then we need one for actual showing. Now just to help my brain so I remember the order, we'll do first you're gonna init, then you're gonna load it, then you're gonna show it. One thing that I did not like about that whole system with the static callbacks and with this whole future thing is that to make it something that was kind of boilerplatey that existed in all of the callbacks was basically this format. I'll just show it as a static function. So let me just implement this real quick. Basically what you have to do, okay, so if result.status equals something, then we need to cast the user data object into whatever type we're going to use and then call and do something with that user data. Before I had, cast the user, this actual component as the user data. This is what got passed in. But what I want to do is call these. I want this code to happen when everything is okay on this end. So if this was Firebase future status, future is complete, right? Everything, the future completed and it had no errors, then all systems are go. Otherwise, you had a problem. So you're gonna, now that's okay, but it's kind of boilerplatey, right? Like we have to write this for every single one of these callbacks. If you remember when we create this thing, interstitial view, right? When we actually use this thing, let's say we've already initialized it, and we're doing this on complete like that. If you remember, this gets called whenever this will get called whenever the status is one of those three choices. So the problem is that it's just not a very clean interface, and then this is also kind of static. It's not tied. It's like whatever we write here is fixed. Like it's never going to change, and it's just not very user customizable, and we can't reuse it in a bunch of different situations. So the idea that I had is, instead of passing in this interstitial view, what if we pass in this interstitial callback and specify basically, if this is cool, let's cast this user data to this type, and then if that cast succeeds, we can call our appropriate callback here. So that would look like this. If that succeeds, then if this std function right here is not empty and it was actually assigned to something, then we can call it. Okay, does that make sense? Basically, and we would pass that here. We would say this would be a member. Basically, we would say you're going to call the static one, and you're going to use this. You can use that as your argument. Static one is, remember, we want to call InitCallback. So we're going to go interstitial add callbacks, InitCallback, like that. So that's what I was. To me, this makes it a lot easier. And then, if I don't have anything assigned to this, it's not going to do anything. If I do have something assigned to it, it's going to do whatever that is. And this only gets executed whenever this is actually done and the app has totally finished being initialized. Okay. that was one of the problems that I had before, was that I wanted a way to specify what happens when this is initialized before it actually becomes initialized, which means I can do stuff like this. Callbacks dot InitCallback equals, and then I can write my lambda, okay? So that's a problem that using this approach solves. Now, I don't want to have to write this stuff 3 different times to call each of these callbacks. To me, that's just very tedious. It's very boilerplate. It's not DRY, don't repeat yourself. It goes against that whole thing. So what we're going to do is use some macros. We'll get rid of this. Now, if you're not familiar with macros, there's probably 101 YouTube videos that explain how to do it. So basically, we'll write this. And it's going to be static void name, and then our arguments. All right, and now we're going to need, remember, because interstitial add has an init, it has a load, and it has a show. So we need one for those. So, and since we're done using this, now we need the same thing for the for our std functions. So we'll do that as well. So it's going to be std, whoops, function void. All right, and let's define it. Callback. So we have our init, we have our load, we have our show, and then finally we have something that'll happen if it fails. So we'll add a lambda for this error. All right, cool. So this is our interstitial adds callback. And now if we actually use it here, like callbacks dot here, there, here's our init callback, here's our load callback. These are the static ones. It's pretty cool. All right, so now we actually need to implement static ones. So if you remember, let me get this back up. Okay, if we remember this format, you can see that like right here is the name of our function. And then this is always the same. This is always the same. This right here is what gets changed, this code right here. And then also this. And we'll expand this a little bit. Basically, this would say that. And then it would say, if it basically would repeat this if we have our callback. If error, okay, then call error. That's basically what this is going to look like. This is basically what this function is going to look like for each one of these. Now, I don't want to have to write this 3 times, because if I did, I basically have to copy and paste it. And I like this pattern, so I want to use it for the banner ad, even though the banner ad has like init, load, hide, show, pause, resume, destroy, move. So there's a lot more. So I'm going to, what I want to do is actually kind of, if there were a way I could get this done with templates, that would be awesome, but there isn't. So we'll do it with a macro. So basically what we need to do is figure out how to create this string right here, and this string, and this string right here. So the way to do that, first we need to provide something in quotes. Fine. Now we need to define a couple other things. We need to figure out how to write this. This will be our implementation. This is going to have like all of our stuff. Now it needs to have this static function name, and then it also needs to have our member func name. Right, and it's going to have a bunch of code coming after it. So let me clean this up. New line. This is our static func right there, and then all of this is just boilerplate. Here is our member func. Now this is our. We need our static func turned into like a quoted string. That. So now we need to figure out how do we call this implementation. All right, and the way to do that is to create a define static callback a b, and this is going to call stat. And then we need a way to actually generate this init callback name. So we'll do a make name function. And this will actually generate that. And then now we can use it. Static callback. All right, and we'll do this for all 3. All right. So again, the way this works is first we generate this name right here. So make name init is going to return init callback with a capital I. Now that's going to get passed to the static callback, which is then going to get passed to this. So now we have init callback with a capital I used here. So every time this says static func, we get the term init callback. Same for when load, we get load callback and then show callback. Now this saves us a lot of typing if we were doing the banner ad version, and I will reuse this when I show the banner ad implementation. Yeah, this will get reused there, and you'll see how it saves a lot of typing. So now that we're done using it, we can undefine all those things. So we'll do that real quick. So now we can work on implementing this as it is. All right, so the first thing we want to do, well, first let's make sure that that compiles. Oh, yes, I forgot to include JUCE. Include JUCE library code, JUCE header. vtable for interstitial add. What is missing? Oh yes, I forgot to do this guy and this guy. All right, so we'll add those real quick. And timer callback void. And while we're here, we'll just make a switch. All right, cool. All right, awesome. So this totally took care of our static declarations as well as our member functions, and this is our actual implementation for each of the static functions. So that's awesome. All right, so the first thing we need to do is when we create one of these guys, we have to capture, we got to store this in our member functions. So let's do that right now. That is going to be interstitial add unit ID, add ID, and then our duration will be our duration between pop-ups and seconds. Okay, great. Now the first thing, remember this has to be, interstitial add needs to have a UI view handle, needs to actually have an object on screen. So we need to wait until this is actually added to the desktop. So one way we can do this is we can actually just get parent component and then add and make visible. It's kind of hacky, but that's totally fine. We don't care about the bounds of this component or anything like that. We just want it to totally work. Now we need to probably make sure that this is not jassert get parent component. This has to have a parent component. And the only way that I can think that this would actually happen is if it was if you were creating this on the JUCE application. That would mean, what I mean by that is if you were in main and you were trying to add it here, JUCE application has no parent component. It's got to be a child component like the main window, how it owns main content component. But you'll notice that the JUCE application owns main window. All right, so let's go back to what we were doing here. So this has been, we're adding ourselves to it. Again, we want this to be so we just don't even have to think about it. It's just a member that exists in our class and it does everything we needed to do for showing an interstitial add all by itself. All right, so the first thing we want to do is start that timer. And we want to start the init timer. And about a minute, 1 second later, 1,000 milliseconds later is when that'll actually fire. All right, and just for safekeeping, just for the sake of safety, we want to make sure that none of these timers are working when we shut down. All right, next. So the first thing is init, and just for code cleanliness, we'll add our full description. So the first thing we want to do is we want to stop the timer. And we'll do the same thing for our spawn add. Timer IDs. So now what we want to do is reset our interstitial view and create a new interstitial add. This takes no constructor arguments or anything like that. What we need to do is just initialize it and then specify what happens when it's done being initialized. Okay, our parent is going to be, remember that thing I showed in the previous video about getting the window handle? So we'll do that here and we'll pass in our add IDs. This is when this is done being initialized, it'll return a future interstitial add or interstitial view, initialize last result. And what we want to do is tell it what to do when it's done being completed. So we are going to call our static function here, which is going to handle all of our only do something if this is actually complete successfully. So what we want it to do when it completes successfully is call the appropriate callback. And the one we wanted to call, because this is initialize, we're going to have it call the InitCallback. All right, now that this is initialized, we need to tell it what to do when it's initialized. We need to actually specify the InitCallback. So put that right here before this stuff gets called, just to be safe. Let's do that now. Callbacks dot InitCallback equals, remember this is a lambda, and it has these funny arguments. Now, what do we want to do? Once this is finished being initialized, we want it to call the load function, or we want it to request an add. So let's do that. And just for clarity, to make sure we're doing everything right, we'll add a debug statement that calls InitCallback like that, just so we know that that's what's actually happening. So the first thing we'll do is we'll create an add mob situation, or an add mob request. Now, again, we're using this with the simulator, so we need to pass that in. Test IDs is an array of constant characters, and we only have one, which is the simulator ID. That's what goes to our test device IDs, and that's what goes, there's only one string in there. So now we can tell it to load the add. And then when it's done being loaded, we want to tell it to do this load callback. Load add last result dot on completion. This we'll follow the same pattern we did here, where we pass in callback, our data type, and then here we're going to do callbacks, load callback. All right, awesome. When it's done being loaded, it's going to go here, and it's going to look for load. It's going to look for the load callback, because if you remember here, we did init with capital I and then lowercase I. And so same thing for load and lowercase load. Now, it would be a good idea to implement an error callback just in case an error message happens. So that's super easy to do. We can just do callbacks.ErrorCallback equals semicolon, and then if there's an error message, we can print it out, and then we'll go like this. We'll print it out first. Now we need to give ourselves a little break just to let us know, hey, this happened. Let's actually look in the console and see what it says. Now let's stop the timers and then restart it a little bit ago, let like 10 seconds pass just so that we can try it again. Start timer, and we want to start the init timer, and we want to wait 10 seconds before it fires, like that. So if there's an error when initialize happens, print it out what the error is, stop the other timers from running, and then restart it again 10 seconds later. So it's going to try to create a new add, and it's going to try to reinitialize again. All right. We were working on what happens when the add is done being initialized. We need it to load, and then when it's done being loaded, we need it to do something. So let's specify that. What do we want to have happen when this is loaded? Well, we're going to print out that we're in the load callback just to tell ourselves that we're in the right place. And then what we want to do, now that this add is loaded, we want to spawn it, right, based on this value here. So we're going to start timer. We're going to start our spawn add. Now remember, duration is in seconds, so we need to multiply this by 1,000 because it's expecting milliseconds. Once the add finishes being loaded, we're going to fire this timer here, which is going to call it's going to actually show the add after X amount of time goes by. All right. So now let's implement that. Now, just for the sake of safety, in case for whatever reason, if this gets called and this doesn't exist yet, we should check for that. So if auto, for whatever reason that might be a null pointer. So what we want to do is we want to check to make sure that the status is complete and the error is 0. And then we want to make sure that the add was actually loaded, just to make sure. And then if those two things are cool, we can actually show the add. So I'll just make little notes about that. Let's just add that right now. Else, the problem is you don't have an add. Something else major happened in your code. So we'll do this first if the add initialized okay, and that follows the same format here. If status is k future status complete and the result is 0. So we can just copy that. Our error message is there was an initialization error, which we should have already been notified about it right here. Actually, we should have been notified about it both here and then also here. So we'll just print it out. Error. Okay, so if the add loaded okay, this is what we need to check for now. I'm sorry, it's not result.status. That's not going to work. We want, there we go. We know it's good if it's green. So add load add result status equals same thing on the other side of that. Else. And we had a load add error. And we'll do the same thing here. String add. And give ourselves a little pause to read the error message. Otherwise, we can show it. Okay, so now all we have to do is just create one. Super easy. All right, we'll go to our main content component. We will add, as a private member, we will include our enter. All right, everything worked so good for there. Oh, we need to grab our other banner ad. Or not banner ad, our interstitial ad. Yes, so this adds itself automatically, so we don't even need to worry about any timers or anything happening on here. So we can just get rid of that. Just comment it out. All right, so all we need to do, and that line. All we need to do is just create this. So, myself some typing. The ad ID is, here's the code for interstitial. And just for the sake of testing, we'll do 5 seconds between when this appears. This is what goes here. All right, let's check this out. Well, what failed? Yeah, we can't actually call that yet. Okay, so we'll scrap that line because it hasn't even been added as a parent, as a child yet. And we'll just go back to doing it the old-fashioned way. Add and make visible interstitial add dot get. This will give us our window handle. Oh, there's our test ad. Then we can close it. And 5 seconds later, it should appear again. Let's see if it does. It did not. So let's see if we can figure out why not. Yes. So one of the things that interstitial has that banner does not is you can get notified when your ad becomes hidden. And what we want to do when it becomes hidden is we want to start our this duration, we want to start our initialization sequence all over again. So let's inherit from that. Let's pop up interstitial add, and we want to listen. And then we have one method to override this function here. And this is what happens when you click that X button in your ad. So when we click that, we want it to start this whole init process all over again. So we'll implement that. Void, and basically if the if state equals firebase add mob, if it's hidden, this is what happens when you click the X. The GUI becomes hidden. Then we know that the user has closed it, so we can call start timer on that guy. We'll just do start timer 1 second later, like that. And just in case, if state equals Firebase add mob. It's visible. We can say add is covering the GUI. All right, let's run it now, and we should see that same thing happen. Oh, what happened here? Oh, what's our error message? No add to show. Okay, it's not ready yet. So we're going to wait a couple seconds. Starting it in our load. Oh, there's our test ad. Okay. Now I'm going to close this. All right, just waiting for it to start back up again. Oh, you know what I forgot to do? I forgot to tell it to listen for when that happens. Now, listening should happen once the app has fully initialized. So that will go in this InitCallback. That's the reason those debug messages didn't show up. All right, one more time, and then we should have this. It's loaded. So now we're just waiting for our 5-second initialization to happen. Awesome. Okay, it's closed. We just got our ad has been hidden. It's initializes load. We're waiting 5 seconds again. And there's our ad again. Awesome. Oh, what happened here? No ad to show. Okay. It's waiting 10 seconds. That's what this part is. All right, cool. That totally works. All right, awesome. So what are some things that we could do to make it a little more just, you just add it to your class and it does it all automatically. Instead of doing, I mean, this isn't bad, just remembering to do, you just create it and then you gotta remember to add and make visible. That's not bad. Something else you could do, so actually what we could do is add it as a, like that, as a constructor argument. So now we can do this, and now we can do owner.add this. And now all we have to do here is just add ourself like that. And now we don't even have to call that line. And this becomes a little bit more idiot-proof. You just have to provide these arguments, and then your thing is created, and it does it. It adds itself automatically. And yeah, that's about as easy to use as you can get. Awesome. So that's pretty painless. And you know, if we change this, once you change this to your actual interstitial ad ID, like with a real ad mob, then this will actually start showing actual ads. So let me show what that's like, just so you can see what I mean. There's our load back. There's our load callback. Waiting for an ad to load. Oh, look at that, a real ad. Okay, it's a test ad, so it's not getting charged, whatnot. All right, click the X. Closes, awesome. And it's going to try to load up another one. Hopefully there's no error. It's fine if there's an error. Oh, look at that, another ad. So awesome, can't get any easier than that. All right, rad, that's awesome for interstitials. Cool. All right, I hope you dug that. Oop, let me kill that ad. I hope you dug that. I hope you're able to use that in your JUCE projects to add interstitials to your mobile apps. In the next video, part 4, I'm going to show how we can improve on the banner ad implementation and make it just, yeah, a lot cleaner, a lot easier to use in our projects, and way more reusable. All right, hope you dug that, and stick around for the next one. Peace.